All right, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. This channel is all about education, and it's about education of things that are important but unsung. Things that mainly subjects that are all-encompassing, theories of everything, cosmologies that nobody's ever heard of, or very few people have heard of, and even fewer have any kind of detailed understanding of them. I also like to let the authors speak for themselves, so I do a lot of reading directly from the text and intersperse a little bit of analysis sometimes there. Today, I believe today is the 152nd video that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory. And this is a theory that was derived in the 20th century by Dewey B. Larson. Started his work way back in 1930 or so, and it took him about 20 years where he still had his day job and so on, just kind of working out the kinks through induction, trying to figure out how to take his ideas and put them into, boil them down. He boiled them down to two fundamental postulates in about the late 1950s, and then took those two fundamental postulates and created an entire theoretical universe from those postulates through deduction. You know, if this is true, then this is true. Well, if this is true, then this is true. I did about 15 videos earlier this year on his talk called The Deductive Development of the Reciprocal System. And it shows all, I think, 165 steps that he took to derive that theoretical universe. And then what he does is he takes his theoretical universe and matches it up with the actual universe that the scientists have measured empirically. That theoretical universe, you know, when he makes those steps, what comes out of that, they don't have labels attached to them. It doesn't say, okay, well, if this, then that, and this is a simple harmonic motion. Well, that's a mathematical term for it, but you know, do the scientists have anything that corresponds with this? And so he has to figure out what the scientists have come up with that actually corresponds to what he's come up with. In some cases, there is nothing. In other cases, there is. So that's kind of how he works his system. He wrote a dozen or more books on every subject that he could get his hands on. Again, it's a system of theory. So if you understand his system, then you can apply it to any subject. He applied it to physics, astrophysics, chemistry, astronomy, metaphysics, economics, and you know, to a lesser extent, other topics. Other people have attempted to apply it to things like archaeology and crypto history, you know, spirituality, and Larson did dabble in that also, psychology, dream interpretation, many other things. But if you understand the system, you can apply it to whatever you want to apply it to. Not an easy task. It's not easy to understand the system, but the basic gist of it is that in Larson's universe, the universe is not made out of matter, and it's not made out of energy. The universe is made out of motion. And other people have come up with that in the past. But what distinguishes Larson is that he defined motion as the relationship between space and time. This defines a generalized reciprocal relationship. between space and time. And then, through the postulates, he determined that space and time they have the same qualities. They're the same thing, except that they're inversions of one another. Reciprocal relationship, same as like 2/3 and 3/2 are a reciprocal relationship, but they both have the same qualities, 2 and 3, but one is the inversion of the other. And you can abstract time and space similar to maybe what you would do with calculus, where you're taking a snapshot of something. It doesn't really exist, but if you take enough of those snapshots, then you put them all together and you can get a curve. With time and space, they don't really exist other than together in motion. Space and time do not really exist other than together in motion. So motion is always a fraction that is partly space and partly time. And all scientific phenomena, including matter and energy, are fractions of space and time. So in Larson's system, energy is time over space, and matter is time to the third power over space to the third power, because both time and space have 3 or more dimensions. Larson calls this coordinate space and coordinate time. And time and space are also progressing. Time is always getting later and later. Larson calls that clock time. And so too, the space is always getting farther and farther apart. Larson calls that clock space. And that was detected by the Hubble telescope in the recession of the distant galaxies. All the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. That Larson calls a scalar motion. Scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no direction, which you can visualize by using a magic marker on a balloon. You blow up the balloon and put a bunch of dots on the balloon. All the dots are moving away from each other. That is a visualization of a scalar motion. All of the galaxies would represent a dot on that surface of the balloon. You could fill in the interior of the balloon as well. Okay, now we are looking at his 1979 book right now called Nothing But Motion. And this book covers primarily physics with a little organic chemistry thrown in at the end. And we are in chapter 5, where he's talking about gravitation. And I think we just left off where he was kind of showing how gravitation fits one of these analogies that he has, and it's very useful to do his visualizations that he kind of presents you with. Even if you have to go over this very slowly, you can rewind me and play it over and over again until you kind of can visualize what he's talking about. So he was also introducing what he called the gravitational limit. So there's gravitation is really an inward scalar motion, whereas the progression of the natural reference system is an outward scalar motion. So gravity can be visualized like taking that balloon and sucking it in, where all of the distant galaxies are moving toward each other. That is a scalar motion, and it appears as if they're attracting each other, but each one is actually just pursuing its own independent course. But they all do it in a chorus, and so it appears as if they're attracting to one another. Okay, so we're going to let Larson take over right here. All aggregates of matter smaller than the largest existing units are under the gravitational control of the larger aggregates. That is, they are within the gravitational limits of those larger units. Consequently, they are not able to continue the outward movement that would take place in the absence of the larger bodies. The largest existing aggregates are not limited in this manner, and on the basis of the principles that have been stated, any two such aggregates that are outside their mutual gravitational limits recede from each other at speeds increasing with the distance. In the observed physical universe, the largest aggregates of matter are galaxies. According to the foregoing theoretical findings, the distant galaxies should be receding from the Earth at extremely high speeds, increasing with distance up to the speed of light, which will be reached where the gravitational effect is reduced to a negligible level. Now remember, I didn't go over this, but the progression of the natural reference system is outward at the speed of light. And then the speed of light is 1 unit of space over 1 unit of time. 1. And the progression is always there, ubiquitous. So what we're experiencing is an outward movement at the speed of light in all directions at all times. But when there is a gravitational effect, the gravitational effect can cancel out that progression depending on its strength. And so the further these things are away from each other, the more attenuated gravity becomes, and then the more the progression shows itself. If things are close enough together, then the gravitational effect overrules the progression, and things appear to be moving toward each other instead of away from each other. So that's kind of what he's talking about here. We'll go back. The largest aggregates of matter are galaxies. According to the foregoing theoretical findings, the distant galaxies should be receding from the Earth at extremely high speeds, increasing with distance up to the speed of light, which will be reached where the gravitational effect is reduced to a negligible level. Until quite recently, this theoretical conclusion would have been received with extreme skepticism, as it conflicts with what was then the accepted thinking, and there was no way in which it could be subjected to a test. But recent astronomical advances have changed this situation. Present-day instruments are able to reach out to distances so great that the effect of gravitation is minimal. And the observations with this improved equipment show that the galaxies are behaving in exactly the manner predicted by the new theory. In the meantime, however, the astronomers have been trying to account for this galactic recession in some manner consistent with present astronomical views, and they have devised an explanation in which they assume, entirely ad hoc, that there was an enormous explosion, the Big Bang, at some singular point in the past history of the universe, which hurled the galaxies out into space at their present fantastically high speeds. If one were to be called upon to decide which is the better explanation, one which rests upon an ad hoc assumption of an event far out of the range of known physical phenomenon, or one which finds the recession to be an immediate and direct consequence of the fundamental nature of the universe, there can hardly be any question as to the decision. But in reality, this question does not arise, as the case in favor of the theory of a universe of motion is not based on the contention that it provides better explanations of physical phenomena, a contention that would have to depend in most instances on conformity with non-scientific criteria, but on the objective and genuinely scientific contention that it is a fully integrated system of theory, which is not inconsistent with any established fact in any physical area. Another significant effect of the existence of a gravitational limit within which there is a net inward motion, and outside of which there is a net outward progression, is that it reconciles the seemingly uniform distribution of matter in the universe with Newton's law of gravitation and Euclidean geometry. One of the strong arguments that has been advanced against the existence of a gravitational force of the inverse square type operating in a Euclidean universe is that on such a basis, quote, the stellar universe ought to be a finite island in the infinite ocean of space, as Einstein stated the case. Observations indicate that there is no such concentration. So far as we can tell, the galaxies are distributed uniformly or nearly uniformly throughout the immense region now accessible to observation. And this is currently taken as a definite indication that the geometry of the universe is non-Euclidean. Now, just to mention, that is a big part of Larson's second fundamental postulate. The universe, I can't remember exactly what it says, but the universe conforms to the relationships of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. So Larson postulates Euclidean geometry even after Einstein and his crew pretty much, started proposing things like curved space and stuff. But one of Larson's followers, Dr. Bruce Perret, the late Dr. Bruce Perret, disagreed with Larson's Euclidean geometry postulate. And he pretty much rejected the entire second postulate. And there are only two of the postulates. The first one is that the universe is made out of motion, and motion is the relationship between space and time are reciprocals of each other. They both have three dimensions, and they come in discrete units. But the second one about the Euclidean geometry, Perret replaced that with projective geometry. Now, projective geometry is not a non-Euclidean geometry. Projective geometry includes Euclidean geometry, but Euclidean geometry is just a small subset of projective geometry. There's what you call a geometrical cascade from projective geometry to affine geometry to metric geometry to Euclidean geometry. And this cascade is what Perret is really proposing for that second postulate. Okay, back to Larson. From the points brought out in the preceding pages, it is now clear that the flaw in this argument is that it rests on the assumption that there is a net gravitational force effective throughout space. Our findings are that this assumption is incorrect, and that there is a net gravitational force only within the gravitational limit of the particular mass under consideration. On this basis, it is only the matter within the gravitational limit that should agglomerate into a single unit, and this is exactly what occurs. Each major galaxy is a finite island in the ocean of space within its gravitational limit. The existing situation is thus entirely consistent with the inverse square gravitation operating in a Euclidean universe, as the reciprocal system requires. The atoms, particles, and larger aggregates of matter within the gravitational limit of each galaxy constitute a gravitationally bound system. Each of these constituent units is subject to the same two general forces as the galaxies, but in addition is subject to the apparent gravitational attraction of neighboring masses, and that of the entire mass within the gravitational limits acting as a whole. Under the combined influence of all of these forces, each aggregate assumes an equilibrium position in the three-dimensional reference system that we are calling extension space, or a net motion capable of representation in that system. So far as the bound system is concerned, the coordinate reference system, extension space, is the equivalent of Newton's absolute space. It can be generalized to include other gravitationally bound systems by taking into account the relative motion of the systems. Any or all of the aggregates or individual units that constitute a gravitationally bound system may acquire motions relative to the fixed reference system. Since these motions are relative to the defined spatial coordinate system, the direction of motion in each instance is an inherent property of the motion, rather than being merely a matter of chance, as in the case of the coordinate representation of the scalar motions. These motions with inherent vectorial directions are vectorial motions, the motions of our ordinary experience. They are so familiar that it is customary to generalize their characteristics and to assume that these are the characteristics of all motion, inasmuch as these familiar vectorial motions have inherent directions and are always motions of something. It is taken for granted that these are essential features of motions, that all motions must necessarily have these same properties. But our investigation of the fundamental properties of motion reveals that this assumption is in error. Motion as it exists in a universe composed entirely of motion is merely a relation between space and time, and in its simpler forms is not a motion of anything, nor does it have an inherent direction. Vectorial motion is a special kind of motion, a phenomenon of the gravitationally bound system. Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks for tuning in. We'll finish this chapter tomorrow. Have a great day.